Do you still get nervous when you meet new people?
Yeah, 100%. Like I'm definitely more of an introvert at heart, so I think like being nervous when you meet new people is just part of the gig of being an introvert. But yeah, like some of the big names I've had on the show also. But I think something to maybe realize about doing the podcast is like people are way more approachable than you think, especially once they've committed to like actually jumping on and doing an interview with you. Getting someone to actually respond the first time on like a cold DM, like that's the part that's tricky sometimes. But once you've got someone committed and they've checked out the show and they're excited to chat, things kind of naturally get into the flow. But yeah, there's always nerves for sure, especially for some of the
Yeah.
bigger names. Hey,
Hey, Phil, how you doing?
not too bad. Yourself, Matt or Matthew? What do you prefer?
I like it. I've said it a few times before. Everyone from North America, when they see the name Matthew, is it Matt or Matthew? It's a very polite way to check. I'm not even gonna. I think it's Phil, right? Is it short for Philip? But
Yeah. Phil's fine. It's
is it
actually
Phil?
the French Philippe.
Philippe. Ah
Yeah,
oui. Tu
Philippe.
parles français, là? Ouais.
Ouais, je suis
Oh,
franco-ontarien.
but you're from
Ontario, but like
très bien.
Ontario is
That's all.
super close to Quebec. Like half the family is actually from the Quebec side. So French is actually the first language.
Really? Oh, for
Yeah.
Quebec it is, but not for your family it is as well then?
Yeah,
Or?
for my family, yeah.
Oh, so yeah, I always get kind of nervous when I do podcasts. I can't even. I hope it's a little bit less for you now that you're in the triple digits in terms of your episodes. But I'm not sweating. I'm not sweating because of the nervousness though. But that's more of the curry that I just had. And it's a really hot day today. So, but it's great to have you. Humans of Martech. I definitely place that like in the top three of excellent names for a product. Segment was the first one. I think we'll touch upon that later. And I have to say, AI decisioning that Tejas and co have named their AI decisioning tool. Naming something for what it is, I think that is absolutely brilliant. I don't know where they got high touch from, but AI decisioning, they definitely scored some points back again into clarity in brand names. But it's great to have you on the show. How's podcasting been since you quit your full-time job?
Yeah, it's great to be here as well, Matthew. I'm also a big fan of listening and reading also. I like that you do both. Like I do hear from listeners sometimes that are like, I like reading sometimes and I like watching and sometimes I like listening. So yeah, easier said than done, but multimodal content is, I feel like the best way to
Yep.
attract people because not everyone wants to listen to an hour long conversation, but yeah, quick little tidbits or an article on LinkedIn here and there. I feel like you're attracting more folks, but yeah, excited to be here, excited to chat. I was looking at some of the questions you sent over, and it took me a bit of time to kind of reflect on them. Like I obviously spend way more time on your side of the podcast, and this like you like also a bit more nervous. Like I get to feel like I'm in my guest's shoes a little bit, and now like I understand why they skip ahead sometimes and like answer or give answers to
Oh, that's
questions that are
interesting. Yeah.
supposed to happen way later on. But yeah, excited to be here. Things are going good.
Yeah.
Can't complain.
But triple digits, like I mentioned just now, I still get nervous because just of the people who are on the show. You get some great people, and yourself included. Do you still get nervous when you meet new people?
Yeah, 100%. Like I'm definitely more of an introvert at heart, so I think like being nervous when you meet new people is just part of the gig of being an introvert. But yeah, like some of the big names I've had on the show also. But I think something to maybe realize about doing the podcast is like people are way more approachable than you think, especially once they've committed to like actually jumping on and doing an interview with you. Getting someone to actually respond the first time on like a cold DM, like that's the part that's tricky sometimes. But once you've got someone committed and they've checked out the show and they're excited to chat, things kind of naturally get into the flow. But yeah, there's always nerves for sure, especially for some of
Yeah.
the bigger names.
That's definitely true. I'm still waiting for David Chan. So David Chan, if you're watching or listening, we really need to reschedule that episode that we had planned about dual zone. But just making use of the opportunity there. Listen, I did have a look at your LinkedIn, and I know a little bit about your background. You've been in the trenches. You've been on the customer side. You've been on the contracting side. You've been everywhere. And so I'm thinking, doing a podcast is great, but what is there still left for you to learn? I mean, have the people you've actually been talking to in your episodes changed the way you look at things, or, how has it changed your opinion of marketing technology in general?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of areas, even when you think you know something really, really well, it's when you speak to an expert who's building a product in that area that you realize during the conversation that you know nothing about that area compared to the level of technical ability they have and how much research they've done in the space. So there's kind of like two things that I was reflecting on. Like one of the things that's made me, or the podcast has made me good at, is realizing the power of having multiple points of views. And I used to be a big fan of trying something really once, seeing if it works or not. And then like that's just part of your identity. Like that ungating content is the better way to do it. And like that's just like your focus going forward, or you've built a composable stack once and you're just like you're a composable person now. And being on the show and chatting with folks
Yeah.
and realizing that there's a lot of debates in marketing, like not just Martech, right? Like gated versus ungated, branding versus demand gen, and full stack versus T-shaped. And then in marketing, like this like multi-touch versus
Yeah.
incrementality, this build versus buy, like warehouse native versus API, like you name it. Like I think I've learned that like buying Martech and running marketing is way more about philosophy than it is about the end result and the tactics and the features. And so, yeah, like the variety of guests and different types of companies, and some folks have different backgrounds. And so there's a lot of different philosophies that I've gotten to learn. So I'm learning something new every episode for sure. Like not all Martech is created equal. At the end of the day, I think like there's only Martech is only as good as the humans that are building it and like architecting it, because the tools are all interchangeable and very similar. There's a ton of
That's a
overlap
strong,
in
strong statement
Martech.
to make in the time of AI now. And it's a strong statement to make in the time of AI about how important humans are. But it's definitely true. I think the philosophy behind Martech is a lot stronger than the tools, because I mean we've seen it. The market's flooded, and I need to speak only about CDPs, where I sit in most, and CDPs. By the way, I bought that book from Franz Riemersma about all the marketing technologies, and I was like, my world of Martech was about this big, and then I started reading Franz books, like, oh my god, there's so much. The scope of marketing technology is so much wider, and I guess that really helps with getting guests for your program. And one of them that I really enjoyed, one of the episodes that really stuck with me, I was working on. We were. My son just got his apartment in Rotterdam, and we were cleaning up. We were painting, doing the floor, everything. And I was listening to the episode with Daryl Alfonso. It's a long time ago, but the topic that stayed with me was the one around technical debt. When you lose your champion, your ambassador in the company, who's leading the charge with a specific tech stack or with a specific goal to enable Martech within the organization. Once they leave, it's a house of cards that just implodes. And that was one of the better episodes that I remember. And I also listened to one around CDPs when I was headed in the plane. So I usually download them. But what guests? I mean, has there been a guest or an episode in general that has really changed your mind about a topic that you felt very sure? Like you just said, you built a composable stack and you consider yourself the composable guy. But has there any been a situation where that's changed?
Yes, I would say like the first one that comes to mind. So I was still working in house at the time, and we were debating internally like how do we measure what drove revenue for our marketing team, for the growth team? And I wasn't like a hard truther of multi-touch attribution or anything like that, but it's like it's what I've used in the past. And was I like speaking to the point where it was like absolute truths? Like, no, it was just a tool for measuring, the visible touch point that led to a conversion. And we used it to establish, different pieces of content throughout the funnel journey. Did this contribute to revenue or not? And so naturally, what drove revenue, I used to just assign multi-touch attribution as, the methodology for doing that, or the tooling for doing that. And it wasn't until like I started researching the space and using the podcast to kind of explore different areas. And one of the companies that reached out to me kind of serendipitously around the time that I was doing that research is a startup called Paramark.com. And their founder, Pranav Piyush, who's a former Bill.com, Dropbox, and he was building an alternative to MTA. And he had a lot of really opinionated blog posts about MTA is dead and MTA is crap and all that stuff. And I was just like, all right, like hold on here. Like, let's see what this guy's like all about. And ended up like researching a ton of stuff before I had him on the show. Like you would do a lot of research before we get into the conversation. But I think like Pranav definitely changed my mind. Maybe not like during the episode itself, definitely like ahead of time, but I credit him to that for sure. And it made me go down this like
Yeah.
big rabbit hole about MTA versus incrementality versus MMM versus causal AI. And there's like a whole new world of attribution that he helped me kind of ignite. And yeah, like his episode is really good for making me understand that like, MTA isn't bad in of itself. It's limiting in the sense that you focus more on bottom of the funnel stuff because it is the click-based stuff that's more trackable, and you lose a lot of the upper funnel stuff, the brand building stuff. And so when you're trying to figure out what drove revenue, you're talking about causality, and multi-touch attribution does not tell you anything about causality. It shows you like the path to revenue versus doing experiments and incremental experiments where you have a baseline, you have separate control groups, and you can see whether doing something actually adds something to the bottom line. So anyways, I would, he's the first one that came to mind there for sure, for changing my view.
It's very deterministic approach. And if I look back at the time, looking back like 20 years that we've been in the industry, it was the only way through tracking. And you're seeing a lot of new approaches these days with AMP, with high touch, all trying to infer more of that probabilistic data and trying to uncover, I want to say, that causality. But yeah, it's just more than just a click stream. And I know I'm probably on repeat on this one for people who listen too often, that I talk about Complete Web Monitoring, that book from Alistair Crowe and Sean Power from 2012. It's really old, but it does, there is a part about MTA on there about, how you do that click stream from your advertising, and having one data source is just, it doesn't tell you the story. It's just a set of data points that you can look at. Once you start injecting in data from like social media or from user feedback solutions, or is your website actually working, up and running, loading fast enough, etc., then you can start telling a story about potential causality, because you're not seeing that in the basic data set. But it's great that the story about Paramark was, I think I missed it. They contacted you. So that kind of leads into my next question. I mean, how do you find guests for this? Is it, I think the founder of Paramark did have a strong opinion that kind of drew your attention to when you start reading his blog post. But is that always the case?
Yeah, so I do have the benefit at this stage of having quite a bit of inbound folks kind of reaching out to come on the show, but I'm pretty booked up and do have quite a bit of backlog. So I usually kind of put folks like that on the waiting list, or what I've actually started doing with some of the stuff that comes inbound is qualifying it before, because like most of it, and I'm sure you're starting to get some also just like PR folks that the company hires an agency or PR agency. And so you get an email from the PR person saying like, it's copy pasted, like, just listen to this episode that you did. I thought it was really great. And it made me think of having my CEO on the show. And it's the same pitch, right? And I now have like this template in Gmail that I respond, and the template goes like, I have a long waiting list. This is kind of the time that you would record the interview, wouldn't go out until this point. But I send people this list of like qualifying questions. And I got this from Lenny's podcast. I'm sure you're familiar. I learned a ton from Lenny back in the day and still do. But the questions that I ask folks like help me qualify whether they have something actually genuinely interesting to say. And so the questions are like,
Yeah.
what's a topic or perspective that you're passionate about that you think doesn't get enough attention in like Martech or RevTech or data ops? Like we go pretty wide. Do you have contrarian opinions or unconventional beliefs? What irritates you? What keeps you up at night? Have you faced challenges or like failures that you're comfortable sharing on the show? And what's a prediction that you think a bunch of people are getting wrong? And so I just like, I throw those out there. Half of folks respond. Half of the responses that come in are very vanilla. Folks like throw it in ChatGPT and I can call out with all the M dashes and the answers that it was written by GPT. But like a small percentage of folks have written back with like some pretty cool ideas and controversial or topics. So that's like the inbound route there. But most of the folks that I have on the show, like I reach out to and still do. Like I'm still highly research mode, curious mode, and I discover new people all the time on LinkedIn or new blog posts all the time. Those are the folks that I reach out to. We have definitely like a nice overlap of folks that we've both had on the show. I'm starting to edit an episode, and you know, the folks that have really cool things to say are usually the folks that are the most interesting to have on the podcast because they're already public. They've already like formulated their thoughts and you just get to have them in an hour long conversation and unpack those thoughts. So yeah, that's the route that I've taken there. I do a bit of inbound, but for the most part, it's like what I feel curious about, especially now that I'm like doing this full time. Before it was not easier, but it was more theme based because I was in house and we had problems and we had like shit to solve. And so like I went, like I did a huge like measurement, like attribution series of episodes because at my in-house startup, like we were debating that. And the year before that, we were doing a big CDP implementation and we were debating CDP versus composable CDP. And so I did the whole thing, had like Census, had High Touch, had all of them on. And it was my way of like coming to the table to the engineers after and saying like, hey, I actually spoke to the founder at High Touch. I got Tejas, I got Boris on the show and we chatted about some of those things. And then like they were like, oh, well, I think we should go platform because of this and because of that. And then I would take their arguments, put those into my questions, and then I would have Acquia on the show, and then I had M Particle on the show. And so it ended up being like super cool. And yeah, so yeah, kind of a mix of different things, but mostly just me being curious.
Oh, that I didn't see the trend. It's not at all obvious, and I really mean that because I did listen to all the episodes around CDPs, the composable versus package or traditional, whatever you want to call it these days. I listened to those, and they were bundled quite close together. But it's funny to hear the backstory around that is actually linked to the work that you were trying to achieve and trying to gather some more information. But I think this platform is great for that because, like you said, it's people are very more than willing to, shell out an hour of their time to talk to you. And you have this platform where you can just ask away. You can ask questions. Of course, you can't get into project specific topics, but it's, and funny how you do the research for a customer that you send that survey. So I think the trick there is for anyone who's trying to get into contact with Phil, you send it at like 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning and be irritated, but have some amazing view about the market and you'll get an invite. But coming back to that story where you kind of think or you adjusted the themes of your podcast to the work that you were doing. Now that you've gone full time, and are you worried at all that you are gaining a lot of knowledge, but you're actually not getting a lot more practical knowledge, a lot of hands-on experience? Is there, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you're going to end up in higher management, board level advisory roles than actually being hands-on. But do you see a risk there?
Yeah, definitely. This is something I debated a lot when I made the decision or was like planning for the transition to go in full time. I think that like what sets the show apart is that like I understand the audience because I live in their shoes and I like ask questions like a reporter maybe or someone who analyzes the industry, but I listen like an operator because I lived in their shoes and I felt their pain, right? And so that's one side of the
Yeah.
coin that made me hesitate. Like, do I go all in on this thing? And so the way I took the decision was I'm full time on the podcast, but I've got a bit of side advisory stuff. So I've got 2 side clients right now. One is
Okay.
like a high level mentoring person is leading life cycle at a big company, and in Europe actually they're doing stuff in health tech, and I just helped them do a big migration to a new customer engagement platform. And the other client is also on the mentoring side, and so it keeps me sharp a little bit. Like I'm more grounded in the tools, like they're using the tools that I'm familiar with. But yeah, in a sense, like there probably will be a time where I need to like drop the advisory stuff. I still keep it now because it's fun and it keeps me grounded in some of the work. But yeah, to your point, like I spent a lot of time being the operator, the individual contributor. And I think that if I was to go back in house, it would be more senior level, less like hands on in the tool. And I think, like team development,
Yeah.
hiring, figuring out strategies on how to build certain things that maybe a bit more my fit. So I think that like having the broader perspective of Martech and more awareness of the different tooling, solutions, philosophies for doing things like would suit me well for having that like multiple point of views if I was to go back in house. But I'm having fun, so don't see myself doing that anytime soon. Anyways.
No, no, no. I mean, keep doing what you love doing. You can. I mean, it sounds like there's definitely something for you to fall back on, if ever becomes the case. But that's not something we should be talking about now because things are going great. I mean, I think you're getting a lot of recognition for the work that you're doing. The content is great, and that kind of brings me to the question around. I always find it difficult to talk about Martech, because it touches two groups of people, the technical people and the marketing people. And marketing is more about stories, about creatives, technology. They want to get to the point. They want to see it work. They want to see results. And the there's always a balance there. And I do love writing about it, but I noticed that I'm not getting into the technical details. People have been saying, hey, why didn't you start a course on how to work with a specific CDP? And I was like, yeah, but that, if you look at the market size, everything's just so small. There's not a lot to gain out there. And you can't do anything on a generic level either. I'm working on something but again, it's going to be very generic. I mean, how do you balance that? Yeah, how should I label that? That kind of the tension between Martech, or sorry, the storytelling, making sure you keep people listen and hooked to your podcast, but at the other time, making sure you're technically accurate. Like you said, you don't know all the tools. You've got tons of experience, and if you, I mean, with more than 15,000 tools in the landscape, you cannot be an expert in every tool. But how do you make sure that what you're talking about is kind of accurate? I always find that a little bit of a challenge. You do research, but what else?
Yeah, it's definitely tough and something you try to straddle with every episode. I used to be a big fan of just like I'll let the guests pick like the areas that they want to go deep on. After I sent up those like pre-qualifying question, there's like a couple in there that we pick, we formulate questions, we go back and forth on like agreeing about the questions, and then like we call that the
Okay.
interview. Now I take a different stance though. So the monetization for the podcast is like Martech vendors sponsor the show, right? So I've got 3 or 4 recurring sponsors on the show. And so really like they care about audience size. And so my show is about the audience. It's about the people coming back and listening. So I started focusing a lot more on people that follow the company page, the podcast company page on LinkedIn. I'll reach out to everyone that follows that page. And I send them a quick DM saying like, hey, thanks for following the podcast. Really appreciate. And if they answer that, I tell them like, I am planning summer content right now and would love for you to just tell me like what keeps you up at night right now. And I feed all of those responses into a custom GPT. That custom GPT has kept a long tab of all of those answers. And I have themes and categories of themes and ideas that I also send to guests when I hand select them. But I also use that to inspire me to find new people. And so obviously there's like stuff around AI, but like a lot of things about generative engine optimization have popped up. I don't go super deep on SEO, but it's still super topical and a lot of people are wondering about it. So I use those to kind of like come up with the theme of the episode already. So like before I even have a guest or I have like an idea of what the questions are going to be, like I pick a theme for the episode. It's almost like a title for the episode. And then I go find a guest, or maybe I already have a guest, but like then we decide, do we go broad on that topic or do we go deep on that topic? And sometimes we fall somewhere in the middle, but I try to straddle that a little bit because to your question, it is really hard to get a wide audience when you have a very niche topic that goes really deep. But it's also hard to have content that is of substance if you're just super broad and you don't go deep on anything. And so I try to do a bit of both, like straddle the middle where I go deep in the areas that the guest is really passionate about, which is like the core theme of the episode, but is broad enough to attract people that are kind of semi curious about that topic. For example, maybe we'll do an episode, the one that we launched today is about data democratization. And the guest I had on, one of his answers to the pre-qualifying questions was that he wasn't against data democratization, but he's like, I have arguments to build a case against data democratization. And I was like, ooh, this is really interesting, unconventional, because everyone loves data democratization. But he had some really cool arguments there. And he wasn't against it really, but he was against it if it's ignoring data literacy, because humans are dumb and they don't know how to read data and they make bad decisions if they just get access to a dashboard and they don't understand the context and the data, right? So that's the whole episode, but we end up going like pretty deep into certain areas, but there's like, we're touching on a couple of adjacent topics. So it's tricky. I don't know if I have like a perfect solution to it, but that's kind of what Lenny does on his podcast. Like he goes really deep in a couple of areas, touches on a couple of like larger themes that some larger folks will be interested in. But it's really funny that you asked that question because I was looking at data on YouTube of like what episodes perform the best, and the episodes that like draw the most people, except for like some of the most recent ones, are episodes that go really wide, like that not super deep. They're like wide episodes, especially it's like some of the clips, like I clip every question and answer on the podcast. And you can see that like the shorts and the clips, the ones that do the best are like the high level topics, like how to hire people, why jumping from company to company isn't like a red flag anymore. With Michelle Nieberding, actually, that's the clip, someone we know in common. So like the ones that do really well are like high level topics, but the ones that people reach out to me and tell me they loved that episode, they're the deep ones, the ones that go really nerdy on one topic. We had Dan from DBT Labs who like we had a whole episode on just like how to build warehouse native tech stacks, and it was super practical and he's calling out tools and like it's almost like a tutorial episode, so to speak. And there's a lot more people that like reached out saying they love that episode. It was like a blueprint. They found it because they searched for something. And so I don't know, it's a balance of both. Like there's benefits to doing both, and I try to kind of straddle in the middle somewhere as much as possible.
Yeah, I have to say, I once wrote an article about how to do server side or actually get off. I need to rethink this one. So you have Google Analytics 4. This was before I was actually getting into CDPs, but it's always kind of been this thin red line through my career is this whole Google stack. And Google Analytics 4, how you can track server side events and get the attribution right. And it all hinges on something called a session ID. So I wrote this whole article on how to do this with Segment, and I have to say it's thorough, but it's not long, but it's enough for to help people get going. And I have to say that that's one of the biggest articles that I have that generates leads, because they say, hey, if you can do this, maybe you can help us with this next question or this next step. And that's always kind of the balance that, I'm writing quite a few articles now, more from my perspective. Maybe I just want to get into this kind of thought leadership and not necessarily around execution. So I'm playing more kind of the analyst to the market, which is, I think it's the right time because there's so much going on. It's freaking crazy right now. Mergers and acquisitions, AI that threw a spanner into the wheels of a lot of projects. Companies just saying, hey, let's wait and see how the dust settles here and how AI fits into the whole story. But I mean, when you're hosting, are you thinking more like an analyst, or are you constantly thinking in the back of your mind, how do I work this into real world situations? Are you kind of translating everything your guests are saying to something more practical?
Yeah, definitely both. I think I said this earlier, like maybe the soundbite for the episode here, but like I ask questions like an analyst, but I listen like an operator. What I mean by that is like the analyst questions come from research and what a lot of people say and what I'm curious about, but the follow-up questions and what I do with that information is all grounded in like I was in those shoes. I know that data quality is a mess. I know that the new VP coming in is going to like want to bring in the tool that they used in the past. I know that the data person is too busy for the marketer, like the non shiny things that people live and feel in the real world. And that's what listeners tell me pretty often when I reach out to them. They're just like, you just get us. It's almost like you worked in our job. And like I did, right? So to your earlier question, like
But
I never
you
want to
did.
be removed from that role, right? So yeah, I think I identify more as the operator who's shining stories of the humans that are building and less of the analysts. But to your point too, like thought leadership and analyst type personas kind of emerge as you're creating content and media for those folks. But I don't know. I see myself less as like a talking head and more of someone who's building a platform to showcase other talking heads and create conversations and debate. And hopefully, you know, someone comes out of there thinking like, I'm not the only one that had that problem. Like this
Yeah.
other person found a solution there. I'm not alone in this world. I feel, even though I'm not talking to any of those people, I feel connected through my headphones because I'm listening to my people on this show. And that's the kind of like feeling that I want to create.
Well, it works, and I'm gonna give you a compliment here because when I do listen to your podcasts, and I'll be honest, I haven't listened to all of them, but yeah, I kind of pick the subjects that I want to be informed about.
Yeah, yeah. Don't blame you.
But I do feel like you are that you're representing us in the sense that you are asking the questions that we have on the top of our mind. What I do see is that you are mainly kind of vendor side from what I can recall. I've kind of going off script here a little bit because I know we did discuss some questions, but have you ever considered going for kind of operator based podcast, like you say? You're more of an you feel like an operator, or you think like an operator, to kind of get the stories from the trenches?
Yeah, definitely do both actually. Like a lot of the episodes for sure are like the vendors, like the builders, the product folks, product marketers on the vendor side explaining to the community like what the heck it is that they're building. And they also happen to be an operator also, right? Or they were in their previous lives and that was like the ignition point for building that product. So there's definitely like a lot of those, but I do definitely feature like the operators in the space. Like just had an episode with someone from Dropbox who leads growth marketing there. She talks about her hatred for migrations and how she treats Martech like hiring and recruiting efforts and puts a lot of thought behind like buying Martech. And we had someone from OpenAI on the show recently who talks about building GTM systems and how he buys Martech and how he uses ChatGPT internally to buy Martech. We had someone from Visa who worked at a startup before they were acquired from Visa. So definitely like try to do a mix of like operators in B2B, operators in B2C, because those are like wildly different worlds. And people that listen might not be in B2B their entire career, right? Like maybe they're stuck on experimenting with tiny sample sizes and they never get to statistical significance. And so they love hearing the B2B stories, but then they hear a B2C story about like all the volume this person had at Visa and like how fast they got to stat sig, and they get a hunger to like try a role in B2C. And so it's all about like exposing people to different points of views. But yeah, I think the vendor stories are interesting because it's surfacing new tech and how people are thinking about behind the scenes, how they built it. But definitely I think the focus is even more interesting on the operators, because most of the folks listening, like they don't work for a vendor. They use vendors and they're interested in learning new tools, but they're an operator, probably like not tied to a specific vendor.
Yeah, most likely. I mean, I think what I mean is like at the end of the day, we're all operators.
Yeah.
Even if you are working at a startup, building your own tool, you're probably using other tools to build that tool,
Fair.
and you're probably using other Martech technology to get your marketing for that tool out there. But you also mentioned you're working on like two advisory gigs right now. Do you think you would have gotten those without the podcast, or have you had any other opportunities come your way for which you can honestly say it's because of the podcast that they're reaching out?
Yeah, I think so. I think none of them have like come through the contact form on the podcast website. It's all been through LinkedIn, but I don't think that the reach, like I wouldn't have reached them or they wouldn't have felt like compelled to reach out if it wasn't for the podcast. One of the advisory clients I've had now for a couple months, and they reached out to help with an implementation for a CDP because they saw that CDP was sponsoring the podcast. And so they just like assumed that I knew the company, knew the product. And so that kind of organically was created through that. But the other one was like a listener, like a longtime listener who was starting a new job and kind of out of her depth. And she was just like, hey, I listened to the show. You had a couple cool episodes around this and around that. Would love to just like have a bit more of like a mentorship type of approach to getting me settled in the new role. So
Cool.
yeah, I would say the podcast has definitely led to some gigs, but it's more of like a networking machine, so to speak. Like I've had a lot of not a lot. Like I've had a couple of offers to go back in house that were kind of interesting, but like not really interesting. But from folks that know that I'm building something, I think that like it shows entrepreneurship. So I actually got my job at WordPress.com. Because of the podcast, or maybe not because of the podcast, but it was something that came up in the interview process. They're really big on hiring people that like have built something, like a portfolio of something. Like, how do you show that you know something? And so
Yeah.
I remember like talking about the podcast. The last startup that I was at, like the founders loved that I was entrepreneurial and had something that I was building because they're also entrepreneurial, right? So if you listen, like I feel like you do it to gain trust. Like at a glance, you might think like, oh, Phil is just like interviewing other people. Like, he's not the expert. He's just like the producer, right? Like he's just asking questions. But the folks that like actually listen or watch, like they hear that, there's sharpness behind the questions, there's research, there's thoughtful applications, right? And this ability to distill like the complex world of Martech into something that's like semi useful and practical for people, like it's easier
Yeah.
said than done. So yeah, I feel like your CV tells you like it tells other people what you've done, where you've been, but what you've built and what you've shared shows like how you think, and I feel like that's like a very different signal. So yeah.
Yeah, very true. And then, I mean, coming back to at the beginning of the podcast where I asked you about, have there ever been any guests that changed your mind? I think it's safe to say that Martech is wild at the moment. The last time I saw a market this wild, like a Wild West, was around 10, 12 years ago with analytics, maybe probably even longer, like 15, 16 years ago. Adobe Analytics was being sold like warm, as we say here, as warm breads across the counter. I don't know. That's not an American or Canadian expression, but anyway, they get sold. You just had to snap your fingers, and there was a salesperson there, and that contract would be in place. And I personally, I find it very hard to kind of stay challenging. Is the actual better word, ahead of everything that's happening within the Martech industry at the moment. It's a little bit messy. So my question to you is, how do you how do you kind of find a way to remain kind of a thought leader, even though you remain kind of open minded with every guest that you have, all the technologies that pass the review there? How do you still create an opinion about the market by itself? That's a crazy question, but it's just
Yeah,
it's so
it is a
loaded
weird
because
time.
the industry state at the moment.
Yeah, it's a wild time. I feel like Wild West is a good way to describe like the the state of Martech right now and how people are feeling. I think it's like a mix of excitement and fear and fatigue with AI and Gen AI and agents and all that stuff. And I feel like my role a little bit on the show is, we end every episode with like just like a grounding question about happiness and how do you balance all the shit you've got going on at work and in life. And I feel like it's a great way to remind people, like keeping up with Martech and like being good at your job and stuff. Like it's important, but it's not why you live. Like it pays the bills and it allows you to like do certain things, but your family, going outside, touching some grass, like that's what matters most. I feel like that's part of what the message we're trying to say with the show. My content and thought leadership, the real operator level stories is what we want to tell. We do touch on like how to keep up with stuff. We ask a lot of questions like, what is the role of marketing ops going to look like when every single vendor has added agentic capabilities to their like technologies? Every single tool in your stack is going to have agentic features. So who's going to decide to turn that on for that tool, turn it off for that tool? Like we're going to be like air traffic control specialists or like referees deciding like, yeah, we're going to use this agentic tool in our CEP, but not our CDP, but maybe in the CRM, but not in that acronym. But like that whole topic about like making sense of the craziness, like is something we care about for sure. And we get folks to like comment on some of that stuff. But to your earlier question, like the operator level story and talking about like the stuff that is going to happen regardless of what happens on the technology front. Like the migration was a shit show because the new VP said that the tool at their last company is the one we have to implement, or the vendor RFP was a waste of time because the VP ended up like vetoing our decision, or the ML machine optimized sending emails without a subject line because those are the ones with the highest open rates. Like the crazy things around like the data was wrong because our bidirectional Salesforce sync failed. Like those stories, the stories that like people feel and they've heard and they've felt, like people aren't looking for like a shiny framework when they listen to the Humans of Martech. Like they're looking for permission to admit that the shit that we're doing is hard, man, but it's worth doing. And the role of our content isn't to like sanitize the work and make everyone feel good about it. It's to just like, I don't know, share lessons in a way that's clear but not dishonest. And yeah, like I said earlier, like if a listener walks away thinking like, I'm not the only one dealing with this shit, like I feel like I've done my job because they've got a sense of community and they feel a bit more sane and happy in their jobs.
Yeah, they definitely need to know that they're not alone. One thing I have to say, especially that I've discovered with podcasting around Martech, people are willing to talk to you, and I think it's a very open community. And I posted as much a while ago, kind of saying that I don't take it lightly that the community is so open. Even from the time when I was talking with Arpit from DataBeats, just being open, sharing your stories, acknowledging that everyone's been there. Everyone's made a mistake in a configuration somewhere. Everyone has been called up to the manager's desk to explain indeed why the people in Italy were getting text messages in Dutch, and it gets a little crazy. But I have to say, with your podcast, coming back to your podcast title at the beginning, it's a fantastic name, Humans of Martech. And I want to use this episode also kind of to thank you for not only for your time here in the podcast, but also putting so much effort into building that community and letting people see that the situations that we run into daily are not unique. We've all been there. And I think the more we share and the more we talk about it, I think the more at ease a lot of people it's going to be. It's about the stories and not necessarily about constantly comparing tools in charts and in podcasts and arguments, etc. But it's I hope you keep going, man. Seriously, I'm wondering what's in store because you work in seasons, right?
Yeah, we well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you.
Of course.
Yeah, we work in seasons in a sense. Like I do 50 episodes per year, pretty much one episode per week. And so new season is like a new calendar year, basically. So I've kind of like timed it so that there's like like we're going to end this season with episode 200. Episode 1 of next season is going to be 2026 and it's going to be episode 201. So that's kind of how it ended up being.
That's pretty amazing. Again, Phil, thank you again for your time, and I think I'm going to push all my listeners over to you. They probably are already. You've got a great part of the market, and we're going to enjoy continuing listening to Humans of Martech.
Likewise, Matthew. I hope you keep going as well. I've been a big fan of listening and discovering new people
we need to
reach
stay
out
curious
to.
and learn.
Exactly. Awesome. Appreciate you having me on, man. This is super fun.